Chief Michael Baker from the City of Tulsa Fire Department with us. And Chief Baker, welcome. So glad that you're here. Really been looking forward to this webinar for a while. We want to get into it here in just a second. But before we do, give us just a brief little background on yourself and kind of tell us a little bit about your career.
Sure. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I too am excited. I think you give me a lot of optimism and you're giving me a little bit of credit. And we'll see how this goes before you think it's going to be too exciting on the back end. But anyway, we're going to do a great job. So thanks to everybody in the audience for tuning in. I'm Michael Baker. I'm the fire chief for the city of Tulsa, Oklahoma. So if you're not familiar where Tulsa is, we're in the northeast part. We're in green country, so we look a little different than Oklahoma City area or what you might expect, the state of Oklahoma to look like. Been on the fire department for 30 years. This is my fifth year as fire chief, and just have the privilege of working with and trying to lead a group of 730 firefighters and some civilians that really work with us every day. We are just really education focused here. And so for me, it was one of those things that kind of came through my career. So this was the first job that I think I've had in the fire department that I haven't been in school. And my wife reminds me that often that it's good to have me back in to the house. But I have some fire protection degrees from community college level, and I'm a Oklahoma State Cowboy. I went to got a degree in political science with a minor in sociology from Oklahoma State University, and then I have a master's degree in Homeland Security from Naval Postgraduate School. And so most of my career has been, line firefighter, and I was a paramedic for a long time as well. And so about halfway through my career, I found myself working in the emergency medical services branch. And that was an interesting time for me as we were going through some challenges within the department. But I ended up spending quite a while there. And there we built out what has been the hallmark of what we're doing now in community healthcare, which is mental health crisis response and de-escalation, high utilizer mobile integrated healthcare programs, and an opioid response team. So we really built out programs to really meet the needs of our city.
Oh, man, that's great. And I didn't realize you're from Oklahoma State, but go Pokes. My son and
That's
daughter-in-law
right.
both graduates from Oklahoma State, and great place there. And Tulsa's such a beautiful city. You're right. People don't realize sometimes how beautiful the Tulsa area is. And really excited. You're going to talk about silos and kind of overcoming them and building trust. And so I want to just let you get to it. And thank you again for presenting and take it away.
You're welcome, and off we go. So
Yeah.
this is a great topic that we were talking a little bit about it before. Organization, you, if you're a leader in an organization or a member of a group, you often sit back and kind of wonder why is it, or how come we can't work with John or Mary or this team? And so one of the things that, and so we've all seen this. So this silo you might see in Western Oak represents really a rigid structure. And I think I'm a visual person. So I think this is a good visualization of what I think about the concrete and the hard rigid structure. If you look at it, you're thinking, man, there's no way that's impenetrable. And that's sometimes how you feel when you're working in an organization. Today's world are facing a lot of challenges. So complexity is one, the ability to be agile in their business models, or if you're in municipal government, you're managing budget, and then everybody tends to kind of silo up when you're having budget challenges. So what also I noticed about this silo in the photograph is its reflection to understanding a hierarchical rank structure organization, and is there an actual definition? And so In a lot of contexts of reading, or if you read leadership books or books about groups, people always mention silos, but I wanted to know, what is an official, credible definition of a silo? And so I found this interesting article from Health and Human Services, really just talking about breaking down silos and providing a framework. And I'll refer to this article a little bit throughout our conversation today. But this group researched and did some good survey to find out um, about collaboration, and which is a really key element of working in a silo. And as you saw, we have rigid groups that form, and I was always wondering, why is that? But Webster's defined, and this is what they use for their definition of a silo, as an isolated grouping or department, which we can recognize that. And here's the thing: that functions apart from others, especially in a way that's seen as hindering communication and cooperation. And so it's easy to recognize that probably in your organization. But also, you have to look at, if we go back and we try to figure out, well, why has this happened? And why do they function apart? Well, part of it's our fault and the way we organize our work. So if you look at hierarchical organizations, I mean, at the top, you have your senior leadership, makes sense. But we divide our work into work groups. The key part of this is that if you are building out a modern organization, if you are a municipal government or a private sector side, the bigger it gets, the more hierarchical your structure has to be, or you make, because you're going to start building in systems like finance system, legal, maybe an accounting branch separate from finance, and then operate. But I can tell you from experience, sometimes even finance and accounting don't talk to each other, or the personalities get in the way. And so if we go back to our visualization of a silo, especially in an organization, we can see that we have created a situation where we have siloed each of these groups. So regardless of the function, regardless of what they're actually doing, we've created a silo by the sheer method of hierarchical organization structure that we tend to apply to everything. And so we'll talk about this and how to overcome this a little bit later on, but it's important to understand that some of it's our fault and it's also some of our goals to correct. So while I like to go back to what is the thinking about people that are in brain, or our cave person brain, or when our threats were the dwelling, and we were worried about saber-toothed tigers, and whether we're warm and cold and where we're going to eat. We formed groups, whether you call them a tribe or just a group or a cohort, or however you identify that. But membership in that group provided one important thing, which is security. And so whether it's food security, security from threats, and or a collective group of people that you can trust. Again, there's that key word, trust. This group comes together. And so if we talk about that, we have social norms and things that appear within our groups. And those groups enforce their own conformity. So they begin to enforce, rule following, what we're going to do in meal planning, or what your task or job or responsibility is. One prime example, as a fire chief in an organization, if I look at a fire station location that has an engine and a ladder, those two folks work on, but yet you're an engine person and I'm a ladder person. You have one specific task and I have one specific task. And then we go into a situation where they're in a district that's more of a regional, decentralized area, and then they're all ultimately part of the fire department. The challenge that we have is all of our employees are decentralized. And as we look at what has happened with remote work, sometimes it's hard for groups to kind of come together, even if you want some group conformity. And then there is do I fit in to finance or HR? Am I fitting into this team that I've been assigned or the silo that I'm working in. And the key is that individuals are carrying around this uncertainty of belonging, and they will fear being ostracized from that group. And so again, we're very much worried about our safety and our security and our success and what we're doing in our workplace, but we're working in a small team or a smaller section, and we're worried about how we're fitting in, especially new employees. So this is why you get a situation where onboarding is very important for new employees, because they have these conformity pressures will be, hey, we need you to make sure you arrive early or stay late, or we don't do that around here, right? And so ultimately, this can be developmental or coercive socialization. So if you're developmental in your group, you're doing a good onboarding process, you're having a great conversation with your folks, you're introducing teams, you're setting forth why we're here in this group and what our function and purpose is. But we all know of the coercive group socialization where, hazing is involved, or conformity will be, mandated to you through either social norms or maybe even bad policy. So if we look at this arrow to the side, is our groups will mimic others. They mimic others in there, and then that hardens that person's ethos and the parts of the way the group behaves, which ultimately can result in a resistance to change. So if we're looking at conformity, we become just part of that group, and then we ultimately resist change. So as a manager, leader, or even someone trying to get cross-functional work groups in place, this is what you may be facing as a group that is resistant to your work and really has a lot of inertia or the resistance to change. So let's talk about one of the terms that I like as a amateur sociologist is homophily. And so homophily term really is just the casual term is birds of a feather flock together. And so Seth Godin provides another good description of homophily in a workplace, but people like us do things like this. And this is part of this conformity that we will see in these smaller groups that work. So it's connection through common attributes. Now, this can go positively or negatively, but if you find that you have a commonality in that group, they're going to work together and they're going to function well. But what happens when you need them to work on a project outside of their work group or outside of their siloed area? We try to find these common attributes to share information back and forth and really build this trust. It seems logical. This is why we like people anyway. You look like me, you do things like me. We may have, we may enjoy football or whatever sport, but that's our connection. I have no idea what you do during the day, but we like the OU Sooners or Oklahoma State Cowboys, or whatever team you support. So those common attributes really form homophily within the workplace. So people who hang out together tend to have the same attributes. Once again, I go back to my firefighter example. And so throw on the same truck, oftentimes these folks will become highly social because they're in a high stress environment and high trust. And so they might have an event after work or on another day where they're hanging out together. But this is also helping with connection, but it's also sharing common attributes, could be positive or negative. And so when people physically are in the same space, when I talk about remote work, if you're having a challenge making sure your teams are cohesive, this may be part of the problem, is that you're not having physical sessions. And sometimes, distance sessions, whether via Zoom or Teams or whatever, may not be achieving homophily in your workplace for the positive. Structural location. That contributes to the formation of common attributes. So firehouse, office complex, section in a building. So all of these begin to develop attributes that the group will have and that you should be able to kind of watch and monitor and see as you're reviewing your teams moving across your workspace. And so it's if you understand that these fundamental pieces of human nature and how they work within groups, I think you'll find that it really gives you a better identification of groups that are willing to work and willing to share information, and then the groups that are more rigid. So again, this comes from an author named Charles Kadushin, who's a researcher, but complex social networks, again, master's thesis level stuff that I did. And this was where I really began to have the experience of understanding how people work together in groups. And so I encourage you to read about things beyond just, kind of leadership books or things that talk about how to manage that. It's like, get to the understanding of what you're dealing with in your organization. So let's talk a little bit about social capital. And social capital is it's a currency, and so it is capital as self-explanatory. But social capital is, what are you reciprocating? How are you assisting me? And can I trust you? And those are very, very big portions of your workplace. And these established as norms. And so, am I sharing? Am I open to information? Am I open to working with you or assisting you on a project? And can I, be trusted? And these really go back to that Paleolithic brain and that bottom of Maslow's, cave dwelling world that we were living. And first is bonding social capital. And so that is the similarity to team members. Okay, everybody's familiar. We know everything together. We have a lot of shared common interest. It looks very inward. And so the problem is that may be because you're scared, you're under threat. The saber-toothed tiger is at the entrance to the cave. And so that is very inward looking, knowing that we need to be together. And this is where we see a little bit in impoverished areas of the community, maybe among our homeless population, is they begin to form very tight groups with similar members who are inward looking so that they can survive, or that they can reduce the threats to their work or to their world in general. These are easy to create because, again, we're looking for people like us. We're looking for birds of a feather. And so a highly bonded group is going to come together and they're going to work together because they trust each other. Again, we're going to have this word of trust running throughout this conversation. But there's bridging social capital, okay? And that's when you get some diversity among your team and you get diversity among the teams that folks are working with. So this is outward looking. So this is going to be a group that is, maybe willing to work on a lot of projects, but they're going, you know what? I think Bill over in this section is a really good reference to that because I met him having lunch the other day. So they're willing to go outside of the group, and this is risky. Remember, if you're leaving your group or you're leaving your protection, you're walking outside of that cave, you're at risk. So these groups are a little harder to create because you have to pull people out of that threat mode and you have to pull them into a situation where they're willing to be open and honest and show what their group has or doesn't have. So Robert Putnam is one of my favorite authors. And so he writes a lot about the communities. He's got a couple of books. Bowling Alone is really his most seminal work, pretty interesting conversation about how community groups have fallen apart and how we just don't come together. But he also talks about this better together, which really addresses social capital. So I'll read this quote to you. The kind of social capital that is most essential for health and public life in an increasing diverse society like ours is precisely the kind that is the hardest to build. So here I've said, hey, you're going to form work groups. You've got a hierarchical chain of command. You've created this structure because your business or your operations demand it. And I want you to have folks that share information among each other and work together. And you're going, I wish I could. But to have a healthy organization, we need to be sharing information across sectors and across sections. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not the best at this. It is a struggle every day to get relationships with labor, management, city government, law enforcement partners, or whoever we're working with. It's often very difficult to bridge out and let them have a trusting relationship with us. And so I know we're all facing these, but we're going to use our social capital to extend out and to make that reciprocity and value and trustworthiness get established so we can be successful. So one of the things is creating good boundaries. And I know that last week, the webinar talked about Strong Ground from Brene Brown. And that's so far, I've listened to about half the book and I own the book, but I can tell you that it's really good as an audiobook because you get to listen to Brene Brown, who is an incredible reader of her own material. But she talks about thriving systems have permeable boundaries. And so I'm showing you this little graphic here. And I've steal this graphic from one of my other favorites, the McChrystal Group, and their book Team of Teams talks about this. And what they found was that they had these siloed organizational structures. As they're going in, they're trying to figure out why the enemy is not ahead of them. This is the General McChrystal talking about this. And what they found was that for every decision that had to come up a flow chart and up to the top, it was wasting time. And the enemy could pivot or turn or be so much more agile than the US military could. So what they found when they studied it is that we needed an environment where people are having these dotted line conversations, where they're moving freely among the organizational members. And so they're having these chats. They're going over to Bill in this section and talking to him about a problem or asking him to come over to our group and let's work on this together because we have a shared interest in this. And that is having a shared system with permeable boundaries. If we get the information flow going back and forth, we get a bridging system, which is much healthier. Atrophy will set in and self-referencing systems with impermeable boundaries. That's that bonding social capital situation. So you know those workplaces, we all have those. We have folks that do well together or not, but we have to watch for the information flow. And these are things that you can look at. And as you hopefully go out and see the work and you're observing your workspaces, that you can see and note that folks are talking to each other, or they're having conversations, or they're asking for permission. Can I go to this workspace and get a consultant to come and talk to us in a meeting? But we don't want that self-referencing. Why? Because that's only that opinion. That opinion gets fostered and driven and stays within that work group. And remember, those conformity norms and those things start happening in there, and we end up with a system that's not working in certain areas. So without sharing, we act clarity and creativity. The group or the organization becomes unable to respond effectively in the complex world. And so if we're not sharing information, your business can be at risk or your organization can be at risk because you're not sharing information among the parties. And you're probably saying, well, yeah, that's why I'm sitting here listening to you on this webinar, is because that's the problem. Or we're doing a great job of this. You understand that there are, formal and informal networks, and we create formal hierarchical structures in our organizations, and we have chain of command. But there's also an informal world where people are passing information right now about information, whether it's by text, social media, by internal communications channels. They're talking, hopefully among each other, but they're definitely talking. And so where you get this situation is, and what I found works for me, is that I have to be situational in the application of chain of command. If we are in a high threat environment, if the risk is high, for me, if we're in an emergency incident, as you know, we have a chain of command through the incident command system. And so that allows us to have accountability, ensure that there's clear communication, and its messages are passed down for operational sake. But that's on one extreme side when we're on an emergency, because I also have to manage people that are in a non-emergency situation, when the situation can be more informal, like I want to talk to you about a promotion opportunity, or I want to discuss a new idea with you. We have to create an environment of trust where they can come to us and feel free to come to us freely in this informal nature. What's happened sometimes is you get folks that live in that rigid structure all the time, right? And you may have high risk endeavors that need someone to be accountable. But my point is that if you build systems and you create a work environment that allows folks to be freely, if it is known that you can freely work among other groups. And they have their specialty and you have yours. But we need to create that as a leadership team and as an organization. So, how do we build this trusting leadership? We have to have clarity of mission. So, first off, is we have to have a mission that is not always such a big, long statement, but we have to say, what is it we do here? What is our purpose? How am I contributing to this company? And whether this is in your onboarding process or not, you need to make sure that folks are aligned with the mission of the overall organization. And that is pretty tough. I'm trying to do it now. I did a mission refresh, and making sure that I even am disciplined enough to say we're mission focused and we're using the mission to guide our decisions, can be a little bit challenging for me. Clarity of purpose. It's like, why do we exist? What is the purpose of our organization? Why does this section exist and why does this section exist? And try not to let that those sections siloed get in the way, because if you're working under a clear mission and you have clarity of the organization's overall purpose, then the folks in those are going to see those common attributes. Those are common shared attributes that your folks will see regardless if they're an organization. This is the expectations we have. We are allowing permeability in our boundaries, and we're setting up the bridging of social capital and the exchange of meaningful work across those sections. So it's by how we set up our organization's mission, what our values are, and what we see as the clarity of purpose. Clear and common communication channels. And so it's making sure that folks understand where to get the most information, because again, we're at the top trying to pass information out. If you're in a decentralized organization or if you're in an organization that has remote work, it's making sure that we have good communications channels. And so for me, again, just an example, I've got decentralized folks. I'm trying to bring together the common operating picture, because the pace of work at the you may be seeing the same thing as they go, well, I put this request in yesterday, how come you haven't responded to it yet? Well, our scope of work is a lot different, but we have to have some aligning communications between. Every other Monday, we do an all hands staff meeting. That means you can join anywhere. You can come in presence to headquarters, or you can be online at your home or workplace or whatever. But they hear directly from me, and they are hearing my intent, my common clarification of the mission, and my clarity of purpose. And so, again, not perfect in this, but striving for a better. Shared data transparency. So if I hoard the data, if I've got the information, then it's going to be looking like that I'm not willing to share anything, that especially if it helps another team get something done. So making sure you have a policy or how you have a structure, whether it's SharePoint or whatever you're using, to have data transparency and allow folks to be able to access the information they need to do their job. Because once we start having those rigid boundaries and those rigid structures in our organization, a lot of folks are going to get frustrated. They're going to go out and start seeking other sources of information. They may not be in tune with what you want as a leader of your team. Again, developing semi-porous boundaries, it really speaks to a lot of these. We know that having these semi-porous boundaries give us that ability to bridge that social capital, get teams working together. And so if you note that you have a group that's not really sharing anything, unless they're in a top secret project that's got the door locked, we need to open that space and let them have some information back and forth with the rest of the team. So make environments safe to hear from others in the work group. And that's a really important, this is organizational psychological safety. The ability for your folks to feel comfortable coming to you or coming to another team member and asking for help. That may be occurring and you're just not aware of it. But those informal structures that build out in our organizations, maybe they're bridging the silos already, and we're just not aware of it. But we have to look for those trends and then work to manage those things that are either off course or not aligned with mission and not aligned with purpose. And so obviously leading with trust. And so I have set my day one principles with my folks in my organization, and I have made decisions that I felt violated. What I said was that, hey, I trust you to do this. And I'm like, wait a minute, I need to trust you to do this. So we have to communicate frequently. openly and respectfully to all. It should be a workplace where trust levels are building up. And I know that's a hard one, but we're building trust. If you don't have a good foundation of trust, I'm not going to leave the cave with you. If I don't have a good foundation of trust within this work group, my retention may be low and I may be looking for another place to work. So building with trust is the number one thing you can do. And there's a lot of ways you can extend trust out. It's probably a whole other, webinar and masterclass full of looking for that solution. So we must embrace the values, the core values of our organization as trust, transparency, inclusivity, shared goals and vision and support relationship building to develop that trust. Establishing a culture where everyone feels valued, respected, and included is paramount to fostering collaboration and encouraging communication. So all of those things, I know that's a lot of stuff there, but that's really the workplace you probably want to be, and it's definitely the workplace you're going to want to lead. And so this is hard at times, but if we're having these shared things, are they posted prominently? Does everybody understand, where we are as an organization and what our goals and our boundaries are? All right, so Mike, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I know that's a lot in a little bit of time, but I hope that really hit home with the audience.
Oh, definitely. Thank you so much, Chief. So many things I found myself wondering, wanted to question you about. Here's one. I know we have at least one question from our audience, but it seems like sometimes you get those leaders in kind of the middle part of the organization that they feel like hoarding information makes them powerful.
Right,
And what we really need them to be is transparent with that information. How do you address that? How do you try to keep that from happening, but then also teach it when you find someone's off course? Can you talk about that
right.
for a second?
Absolutely, and you're spot on. I see it in my organization. I've seen it in much others, and the way I look at this is information is a currency, kind of like that social capital. If knowledge has a value to it, and if I know something, and I need to try to build a relationship with you, I'm going to use that tidbit of information to either show you that, hey, I'm sharing information with you because I want to connect somehow with you. Like, maybe you're a bird of a feather in another group. But I think knowledge and information have power, and it's a currency. It's a currency within my organization significantly. And so what we do is I talk about that a lot. And it's the reason I talk about it a lot is because we have to remind folks, and I use this phrase, see something, say something. If you have a problem with a piece of equipment or something's not right in your world, tell us that it needs to be repaired. Don't just hoard it and complain about headquarters, right? No one ever listens. I give folks a lot of access to either my staff. And like I said, we have a open staff meeting on Monday mornings. You can chime in about anything that's going on. We have clear rules, but be respectful. But ask any question. That's what that is for: is asking those questions for clarity and establishing common purpose. And so, until we can get an individual that is, or get our leadership to recognize that that information currency is not helpful to every bit of the organization, common purpose, common mission, it becomes a challenge in our leadership development courses. And as we bring on new firefighters, we talk a lot about this. We do our promotional exams for promotion to officer level will have or may have had in the past scenarios that will replicate this situation. And so we find anything we can to have them share that information. And our assessors in the promotion process will come out and they'll say, they're thinking like the position below them. They're not thinking like where they're going to promote to.
Yeah.
And they're hoarding information, or they're not sharing appropriately, or they're not reporting an HR issue up the chain of command where it needs to be handled per policy. So, again, it's having access to people, building trust so they feel comfortable in sharing. And so, a very difficult situation, but especially in a decentralized organization, if you have workplaces across a region or the
Mhm.
globe, you're really going to find that as a challenge as well.
For sure. And I think you really hit the key is that you as the leader have to be very intentional
Mm.
about, expectations and being aware of the temptation to go the other way. And I think that's really crucial. And probably when you've said it so many times you feel like you're blue in the face, you got to say it about 10 more times
Keep
after
saying
that,
it. Right.
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, here's a couple of more that we want to get to, and one of them is very similar. Just maybe take it from the other angle. What can you do as a mid-manager who would like to improve transparency and open communication within a siloed organization? So take yourself out of the chief position,
Yep.
maybe go into that maybe captain position, something
Hmm.
like that. How would that person make things more transparent?
I think the number one thing you can do is walk the walk. And so if you are a leader in an organization, whether it's a mid-level, you have been promoted to a position where you should be defending what the organization is saying, right? Or at least asking for clarity. And one of the things that I hear from mid-level management is my firefighters are asking me about this.
Mm,
And so they are taking that information and they will call maybe not me, but their district chief or someone in the little bit higher level and they'll say, "Hey, we have some issues and concerns. Can you come by and have a cup of coffee with us in our section?" I'm a
mm.
firm believer in being as close to the work as possible and learning from those that are as close to the work as possible. So if it's me they want to talk to or somebody else in the mid-level management, they will provide some clarity because they've heard me talk about it. Or they will provide clarity and say, you know what, that's a good question. I'm going to take it to the boss. Um, so it's having a leader at that mid level that is comfortable enough to both work between the people that are assigned to them and the top. And sometimes that is very difficult for folks who have low trust. And so it's trying to build that trust and not, you don't need to be berated when you bring a question that you think, well, that's stupid, right? I've said it 50 times. I don't know why I have to say it 51. That degrades that trust that you need to encourage those folks to come up and say something. And I say it again, like we talked about a minute ago, 50 times, and then I'm saying it 50 more, so that they hear the fact that, you know what, you can come to us with these. I'm available. I have a phone call. My door's open. You can schedule an appointment, whatever you want to do. But we need to get those questions answered because those folks are doing the work and they may
Yeah.
have something critical that everybody needs to know.
That's right. That's right. And what you're reminding me of, Chief, is the importance of being from another discipline. Bring this over, being a non-anxious presence, because
Mm,
if you get all anxious when that problem comes to you, then the other person mirrors that.
yeah.
But if you're not anxious about it, okay, I'm not upset, there's a problem, let's solve it, then they tend to mirror that too. And it's really important. I see this in organizations when a problem comes up and maybe the leader, they don't mean to, but they escalate it instead of
Right.
de-escalate it. And then that kind of causes trouble for sure. So
Well,
here's
those folks are
what I like.
taking cues off their leader.
They
And
are.
if, again, we go back to the cave, if you're scared, then maybe the group conformity says that we should be scared too, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's a really key insight. Well, time for one more question, and I love this question too. It's like, what do you do when you've got, you talked about permeable boundaries and one department talking to another. So what do you do when there's conflict between those two
Mm,
departments
right.
that block collaboration? How do you address it? Does this just kind of come down to one-on-one, or how do you address that?
I believe that there's several different avenues. I think the first one is if it's been, let's say it's the team has brought to the department manager a problem and says, we're trying to work with finance over here and we're not getting anywhere. I think it's incumbent upon that team leader to say, okay, I'm going to go meet with their leadership team or their management team and say, hey, let's have kind of a conversation about what we're seeing here. I think understanding clarity, and then between the two parties is very important. And then I think the next step is if you can reach consensus there, it's coming back and bringing those two troops together and saying, look, we have common attributes that we share between us. What is the personality issues that maybe the higher level discussions? What are the issues that we're having? Well, the assumption is that this individual doesn't like this individual or whatever. If you can have those conversations, you can solve a lot of problems at the lower level. But I think eventually there could be a problem where you get to the point where higher management has to step in. And again, if you're doing it correctly, I believe you're going to build a trusting environment that says, hey, we can talk through these. I hear what you're saying. I'm building a list of your complaints. I'm going to monitor the progress, but eventually we're going to start finding the folks that want to work together so they
Yeah.
can begin that permeable boundary group. And then that becomes the group conformity and the group norm that the attributes are established as they start working through there. That's kind of my take on it. We've done a lot of those with outside agencies that people are mad about. I had a meeting just this morning with an organization that had some confusion about things that we had done. So we had to get some clarity, and I had to make some commitments and take away a list of things to do.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, Chief Baker, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic presentation. I was really excited about it, and now I'm super excited about it. Didn't I just, man, you hit so many things that resonated with me, and I'm sure everybody else. And I really appreciate the study that you put into it. It reminded me of a book I'm reading right now called Writing to Learn. And the idea is you don't just write about what you know about, you write what you don't know about in order to learn about it.
That's
And
right.
you told me you kind of did this deep dive, and we became, the recipients of that good hard work you did, and we appreciate that very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks everybody for letting me get better.
Well, you made us better too. And so really appreciate it. Wish you all the best. And thank you everyone for being here and being a part of this. Want to wish you a happy Thanksgiving. We won't have a webinar next week, and we will see you the first week of December with Micah Gaudette giving us kind of an overview and having some Q&A on the most significant developments in AI in the last year. So I think you'll want to be a part of it. And we hope to see you then. Thank you, Lisa Shook, for your work behind the scenes and making this possible, and everyone else.